Emma Whitcomb stood at the center of the orchard clearing, clipboard against her hip, reciting the order of a stranger's wedding from memory processional, vows, the exact minute the string quartet would shift key. She didn't glance at the page once. Nathan Kirby knelt by the arbor a few feet away, tightening a bolt that didn't need tightening. "You'd make a great bride someday," he said, not looking up. "You've got the whole thing memorized better than the woman actually getting married." Emma didn't look up either. "I'd need a groom for that." The wrench in Nathan's hand went still. "Keep that answer in mind. By the end of this one, it means something neither of them expected." The orchard had belonged to the Whitcomb family. Before either of them was born, rows of cherry trees planted by Emma's grandfather turned into a wedding venue by her father 2 decades later, when the fruit alone stopped covering what the land cost to keep. Emma had grown up walking between the trellises before she'd learned to read a balance sheet, and she ran the place now the same way her father had taught her to. Early mornings, long nights, a phone that never fully went quiet, even on Sundays. Nathan had been hired 3 months earlier to rebuild the ceremony arbor and the wooden stage behind it, one of a dozen local contractors her assistant had lined up before Emma settled on him specifically. His estimates were honest. His work was clean, and he didn't pad invoices the way the last 2 carpenters had. He kept mostly to himself. He showed up early, worked until the light went, and drove back into town, where his son was waiting with dinner half made and homework half finished. Around them, the crew was already breaking for the day, folding tarps, coiling extension cords, calling out good nights across the gravel lot. Emma watched Nathan gather his tools without a wasted motion, the kind of economy that came from doing something so many times it no longer required thought. She had noticed it before. She hadn't let herself think about why. Marion Boyd, the company's longtime accountant, found her by the front gate a few minutes later, a folder tucked under one arm and reading glasses pushed up into gray hair. "You've got the anniversary meeting Thursday," Marion said. 12 months since your father passed. The board wants it on record before the window closes." Emma didn't need reminding. The will had given her a year of sole authority, 1 year, to run Whitcomb Orchard Estates exactly as she saw fit. No board approval required for anything short of selling the land outright. After that, every major decision went back to a vote of 7 people, most of whom had known her since she was in pigtails, and none of whom had run a business through a single wedding season. She'd known the date was coming the way you know a storm is coming from 3 states over. Knowing hadn't made it any easier to watch it arrive. "I'll be ready," Emma said. Marion studied her a moment too long before nodding and walking off toward the office, heels clicking against gravel in a way that had marked the end of a workday at Whitcomb Orchard for over 20 years. Emma turned back toward the arbor and found Nathan already watching her, not with curiosity, just the quiet attention of a man who noticed when someone was carrying something heavy and didn't feel the need to ask about it out loud. "Long week?" he asked. "Long year," she said, and left it there. The next morning, Sam Kirby showed up with his father for the first time that season, 9 years old and already taller than the toolbox he was carrying. He set it down carefully at the base of the arbor, the way his father had taught him, and looked up at Emma with the unguarded directness only children manage. "Are you the lady who owns all the cherry trees?" "I am," Emma said. "There's a lot of them." "There are. About 6,000, if you count the young ones that haven't fruited yet." Sam considered this number with real seriousness, the way a 9-year-old considers anything that sounds impossibly large, then reached into his pocket and held out a small tangle of ribbon he'd found in the grass, leftover trim from a wedding the week before. "You dropped this. I think that one belongs to a bride," Emma said, crouching down to take it from him. "Thank you for finding it." Nathan watched the exchange from the ladder, something in his chest loosening in a way he didn't examine too closely. Sam wandered off toward the row of half-finished chairs stacked near the equipment shed, already narrating some private game to himself, and Emma straightened up, brushing grass from her knees. "He's got good manners," she said. "His mother's doing mostly," Nathan said. "I just try to keep him fed and on time for school." It was the first time in 3 months he'd mentioned a mother at all, and Emma didn't push. She'd learned, in this line of work, that people told you what they were ready to tell you, in the order they were ready to tell it, and rushing them only closed the door faster than it would have shut on its own. Emma tucked the ribbon into her jacket pocket instead of tossing it in the lost and found bin by the office door, though she couldn't have said why at the time. It stayed there through the rest of the week, Forgotten and not forgotten, the way small things sometimes are. Dean Ashford arrived an hour later in his usual gray suit, out of place among the sawdust and the ladders, his tablet already lit to a spreadsheet before he'd finished crossing the gravel. He was Emma's cousin twice removed, technically, though the family called him closer than that out of habit. He'd worked alongside Walter Whitcomb for over a decade, handled the business side while Walter handled the trees, and since Walter's death the board had leaned on him more than anyone expected, Dean included. Maintenance costs on the west section are up 11% from last season, Dean said, not quite a greeting. I'll bring the full numbers to Thursday's meeting. Bring them, Emma said. I'll have mine ready too. Dean's smile didn't reach his eyes. Just want everyone informed before we vote. He left the way he'd come, and Emma watched him go with the particular exhaustion of managing a relative instead of an employee. Nathan hadn't said anything during the exchange, but he'd clocked it, filed it away the same way he filed away a joint that didn't sit quite square, something worth keeping an eye on later. Traverse City settled into autumn around them the way it did every year. The tourists thinning out, the bay turning a colder shade of blue, the roadside stands swapping their summer signs for pumpkins and cider. Emma had lived here her whole life and had never once seriously considered leaving, not even during the 2 years after the wedding that didn't happen, when half the town seemed to know her business better than she knew it herself. Nathan had grown up 2 counties over, and had only landed here because his late wife's mother had a spare house and a willingness to help raise a grandson she adored. Neither of them had planned on staying for the other. Neither of them yet would have admitted that was starting to change. That afternoon, Emma's assistant confirmed an appointment for the following week. Diane Pruitt, a branding consultant Emma had hired back in the spring to refresh the orchard's image before peak wedding season, was finally free to walk the grounds. Emma had nearly forgotten she'd booked it months ago. She penciled it into a calendar already crowded with the board meeting and Marion's quarterly reports, and didn't think about it again until Diane actually arrived with a camera and a folder of comparison photographs from other venues across the state. Diane Pruitt walked the grounds on a Tuesday morning with a camera around her neck and a notepad she barely used, more interested in touching things than photographing them. The grain of the arbor posts, the angle of the trellis joints, the way the ceremony stage caught the morning light, without needing paint to do it. She stopped cold at the stage, running her palm along a seam where 2 beams met without a single visible nail or bracket. Who built this joint? I did, Nathan said, coming around from the far side with a level in one hand. Diane looked at him properly for the first time, and something shifted behind her eyes. This is an Alden and Rowe cut. I'd know it anywhere. I used a photograph of this exact technique in a branding deck 10 years ago. She stepped back, studying him now instead of the wood. Nathan Kirby, you did the Marchetti wedding in the Hamptons, the one with the floating stage over the koi pond. That ran in 3 separate trade write-ups. Emma, a few feet off reviewing seating charts on a clipboard, looked up slowly. That was a while back, Nathan said. A while back, Diane repeated, half laughing, not unkindly. You basically invented that joint. People in the industry assumed you'd retired rich and just stopped answering emails. Something like that, Nathan said, in a tone that closed the subject as firmly as a door swinging shut. Diane, sensing she'd wandered somewhere she wasn't meant to, excused herself to finish her walk of the grounds, camera swinging at her side. Emma didn't move for a moment. She was doing the math in her head. The man she'd hired for local, dependable carpentry had spent years building ceremony stages for some of the most photographed weddings on the East Coast, had a technique named after him in industry write-ups, and had never once mentioned any of it in 3 months of daily conversation over sawhorses and coffee. You could have said something, she said finally, once the 2 of them were alone by the stage. Nathan picked the level back up, checked a beam that didn't need checking. It wasn't relevant to the arbor. That's not why you didn't say it. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer at all. Then, without looking at her, I left that work 6 years ago. Same month my wife died. The travel 40 weeks a year, sometimes more. It worked fine when there were 2 of us raising Sam. It didn't work alone. He set the level down for good this time. I'm not hiding a career, Emma. I'm just not in it anymore. And I didn't see the point in bringing up a version of my life that isn't mine anymore. Emma looked at him, really looked, in a way she hadn't quite let herself before, and something in her chest recognized something in his. She knew what it was to keep a door shut on a version of your own life you weren't ready to walk back into. She didn't say any of that out loud. She only nodded, once, and let the moment pass without turning it into more than it already was. "The arbor looks good," she said instead. "It should. I had good training." A small, careful smile passed between them, the first one all season that wasn't strictly about work. 3 miles away, in an office with better carpeting than the one Emma used, Dean Ashford closed his door and dialed a number saved under a name that wasn't the real one. "It's Dean," he said when the line picked up. 12 months, right on schedule. Votes this week." A pause while someone spoke on the other end. "I told you already. Once the sole authority window closes, the board decides, and the board listens to me, they always have." Another pause, longer this time, his jaw tightening. "The commission's still in writing, correct? I want that confirmed in front of me before I stand up and say a word to anyone." He hung up and sat for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. The stillness of a man doing arithmetic he didn't especially want to do out loud, not even to himself. The board's preliminary meeting happened 2 days later, in a conference room that still smelled faintly of the coffee Walter Whitcomb used to insist on brewing himself every morning before anyone else arrived. Dean stood at the head of the table with a slide already projected orchard maintenance costs, climbing steadily upward, a red line crossing a blue one somewhere around the current fiscal year, the kind of chart designed to alarm before anyone had time to ask a follow-up question. "I'm not saying we sell everything," Dean said, in the reasonable voice he used when he wanted to sound like the only adult in the room. "I'm saying the west parcel isn't earning its keep the way the rest of the property is. Lakeshore Crown has made a serious offer, well above assessed value. We'd keep the venue, the house, the core acreage. We'd just be smart about the rest before it drags the whole company down with it." Emma sat across from him, hands folded, letting him finish before she spoke. "The west parcel is half our ceremony backdrop, Dean. You take that away, you take the reason people book us a full year in advance instead of choosing a hotel ballroom." "Sentiment isn't a line item," Dean said. "Neither is panic," Emma said. "We have 3 weeks before my father's window closes. I'd like to use them finding a better answer than selling off the one thing that makes this place worth anything to anyone." One of the younger board members, a cousin on her mother's side who ran a shipping business out of the marina, tapped his pen against the table. "How much has Lakeshore actually offered?" "Enough that it's tempting on paper," Dean said, "which is exactly why we should take it seriously instead of letting sentiment make the call for us." "And how long has this offer been sitting on the table?" Emma asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems awfully specific for something that just landed this month." Dean's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "These things take time to negotiate properly. I wasn't going to bring you a half-formed offer." "No," Emma said. "I don't imagine you were." The room went quiet. The way rooms get quiet when everyone is doing their own private math instead of listening to the person still talking. The vote wasn't today. Today was only the opening argument. But Emma left the meeting with the specific chill of knowing exactly how many days she had left, and exactly how much ground she still needed to cover before Thursday came around. That night, Marion stayed late going over the maintenance figures Dean had presented, cross-checking them against the company's own books out of the same stubborn habit that had kept her at Whitcomb Orchard for over 2 decades. Most of the numbers matched. One line didn't: an outside consulting fee, paid quarterly, routed through a vendor code she didn't recognize from anywhere in the system. She wrote the number down on a sticky note, stuck it to the edge of her monitor, and told herself she'd chase it down when she had a free afternoon. She didn't have one yet, not with the board vote bearing down on all of them. Nathan noticed the lights still burning in Emma's office long after the crew had gone home, and instead of driving straight to his mother-in-law's to collect Sam, he found himself finishing a stage rail that didn't strictly need finishing that night. When he finally packed up his tools, Emma was still at her desk, jacket still on, as if she'd forgotten she was allowed to take it off at some point. "You're going to run yourself into the ground," he said from the doorway. "That's the plan," Emma said, not quite joking. "There's a diner on Union that's still open this late, or," he glanced toward the equipment shed across the lot, "there's a space heater and a folding table about 40 feet from here, and I happen to know where the good coffee's hidden from the crew." She laughed, actually laughed, The first unguarded sound he'd heard from her in 3 months of working alongside her, and something about the shed sounded better than the diner. Quieter, entirely hers instead of open to the whole town. The shed it is, then. They ate sandwiches Nathan had packed for himself and Sam and never gotten around to finishing, sitting on overturned crates under a single bare bulb, the smell of sawdust and cut pine settling over everything like a second kind of quiet. Somewhere in the middle of it, without either of them deciding to steer there, the conversation drifted away from wedding logistics and toward the things people don't usually say out loud on a Tuesday night in an equipment shed. Sam mentioned his mother used to sketch, Emma said. Wedding dresses, I think, he said. Nathan turned his coffee cup slowly between his hands. She did custom work before Sam was born. Little sketches for friends, mostly, nothing she ever charged real money for. She kept a whole notebook of them. I still have it in a box at the house. He didn't offer anything more, and Emma didn't ask for more, but something had cracked open a little wider than it had been an hour ago. I was engaged once, Emma said, surprising even herself with how easily it came out. Here, on this property, 6 years ago, actually same year, I think, as whatever happened to you. Nathan looked up. It didn't happen, she said. The wedding. He wasn't who I thought he was, and I found that out 3 weeks before the ceremony, standing by the pond behind the east row. I spent the next 2 years pretending I ran this place for the love of cherry trees, instead of because it was easier than looking at that spot too closely. Which spot? She tilted her head toward the dark window, toward the shape of the orchard somewhere beyond it. You'll walk past it eventually. You won't know it's the one. Do you regret it? Emma asked, walking away from all of it. The name, the write-ups, whatever it would have turned into by now. Nathan considered the question longer than most people would have. Some days. Not the leaving. Just some days I miss being good at something in front of people who noticed. Out here, nobody knows what I used to be capable of. They just see a guy with a truck full of lumber. I noticed, Emma said. Before Diane ever said a word. What did you notice? That you never build anything the easy way if there's a better way that takes twice as long. She turned her cup in her hands. I figured that came from somewhere. Nathan didn't answer that directly, but something in his face eased. The particular relief of being seen for a thing you'd stopped expecting anyone to notice. Neither of them said anything else about the pond, or the notebook, or the 6 years each of them had spent quietly rebuilding a life out of the wreckage of an old one. Nathan reached over and nudged the folding chair under her before she'd even fully started to stand, steadying it against the uneven shed floor, an old habit from a lifetime of building things that needed to hold weight. Emma settled back into it without comment, without either of them naming what the gesture was. Outside, the wind moved through the cherry trees the way it had for 60 autumns before this one, indifferent to boardrooms and deadlines and old engagements, and for a little while neither of them thought about any of it. Word of the shed dinner reached Dean by the end of the week, the way small-town gossip always finds the person least entitled to hear it first. He used it the way he used most things, carefully, and in front of an audience that could not easily push back. I only bring it up, Dean said at the next board session, addressing the table rather than Emma directly, because perception matters. We're 3 weeks from a vote that decides this company's future, and our CEO is spending her evenings alone with the contractor she personally hired to rebuild the property. I'm not questioning her judgment outright. I'm asking the board to consider whether her judgment is the only thing steering the room right now. A silence followed that Emma recognized instantly, not confusion, agreement dressed up as caution. One of the older board members, a friend of her father's for 30 years, cleared his throat. It's a fair question, Emma. Not an accusation. Just how do we know this isn't clouding things for you? Emma kept her hands flat on the table until she trusted her voice to stay level. Because I've run this company alone for a year, and the numbers back up every decision I've made in that time. If you want to question my judgment, question the numbers. Don't question who I choose to eat dinner with. The meeting ended without resolution, which was its own kind of damage. Nothing decided. Everyone unsettled and quietly recalculating. Word reached Nathan before Emma got the chance to tell him herself, and he showed up at her office that evening still in his work clothes, sawdust on his forearms, jaw set in a way she hadn't seen from him before. You want me off the job? He asked. No preamble at all. Say the word. I'll finish the stage and disappear. Makes this easier on you, if that's what you need. No, Emma said, immediate, sharper than she'd meant it to come out. Then, quieter. No, I don't want that. That's not the same as wanting me here. I want you here, she said, and for the first time she let him see that she meant it as more than a sentence about carpentry schedules. Whatever this is between us, I'm not going to let Dean Ashford decide it for me. Nathan didn't say anything clever back. He just nodded, once, the way he did when a joint finally sat square after 3 tries, and something between them settled into a place it hadn't occupied before that night. Marion Boyd hadn't stopped thinking about the sticky note on her monitor. That weekend, alone in the office with a space heater humming and a thermos of coffee going cold beside her, she pulled 2 years of vendor records and laid them out across the conference table Dean liked to stand at during his presentations. The outside consulting fee showed up 8 separate times, always the same amount, always routed through a shell entity called North Shore Advisory. She traced the entity's registered agent to a P.O. box in Traverse City, and, after an hour of digging through public filings she probably wasn't technically supposed to be looking at on a Saturday, found the name listed behind it. Dean Ashford. She checked the date on the brokerage filing twice, certain she'd misread it the first time. 14 months back put it 3 months before Walter Whitcomb's diagnosis, 5 before he died. Whatever Dean had been planning, he'd started planning it while Walter was still walking the rows every morning, still brewing that same terrible coffee, still trusting the man across the table from him with the numbers he was too tired to check himself anymore. Marion had worked for this family long enough to have loved Walter Whitcomb, the way you love people you've spent decades quietly protecting. She sat back in her chair for a long time before she finally picked up the phone to call Emma. Marion arrived at Emma's office Monday morning before the first crew truck had even pulled into the lot, a folder held against her chest like something that might come apart if she loosened her grip on it. I need you to see this before anything else happens this week, she said. She laid it out piece by piece, the vendor entity, the registered agent, the payments that traced back not to any real consulting work but to a private brokerage agreement between Dean and Lakeshore Crown Resorts, signed 14 months earlier and before Walter Whitcomb had even passed away. The agreement guaranteed Dean a commission if the West parcel sale closed after the sole authority window expired. He hadn't been protecting the company's finances at all. He'd been positioning himself to profit from selling it out from under her, and the timeline meant he'd started planning it while her father was still alive and sitting at the head of that same conference table. I should have brought this to you sooner, Marion said. I had the first number weeks ago. I didn't want to believe what it meant, so I kept telling myself I needed more before I said anything. Emma read the documents twice, her hands steady in a way the rest of her wasn't. When she finally looked up, it wasn't anger on her face so much as exhaustion, the particular kind that comes from realizing you've spent a year defending a company against a threat that had been sitting inside it the entire time, dressed in a suit and calling itself family. Nathan found her 20 minutes later, still at her desk, the folder open in front of her, and he didn't ask what was wrong before he pulled the second chair around and sat beside her instead of across from her. He didn't offer advice. He didn't tell her it would be fine. He just stayed, close enough that she could lean sideways if she needed to, and after a moment she did, just slightly, her shoulder against his, and neither of them made it into anything bigger than it needed to be. I've been doing this alone for a year, she said finally, to the folder more than to him. I didn't know how much until right now. You're not doing it alone today, Nathan said, and left his hand resting lightly on the back of her chair, close enough to matter, not close enough to ask for anything. They sat like that for a while, the office emptying out around them, the ordinary sounds of the parking lot filtering in through the window, a truck door, someone laughing, the crew calling it a night the same as always, unaware of everything that had almost happened to the place they worked. Emma finally closed the folder and set it aside, and for the first time in longer than she could easily remember, she let a workday end without immediately starting the next one in her head. The board convened for the final vote on a Thursday, 3 days ahead of the deadline written into Walter Whitcomb's will. Emma stood at the head of the table where Dean usually stood, a stack of documents in front of her instead of a slide deck, and she didn't raise her voice once through the whole presentation. She didn't need to. The numbers did the raising for her, the shell entity, the registered agent, The commission agreement dated months before her father's death, all of it laid out in an order that made the story impossible to misread, no matter how anyone in the room wanted to spin it. Dean tried to turn it, the way she'd expected he would. "This is exactly what I warned you about," he said, gesturing loosely toward the back of the room, where Nathan sat at Emma's request. "She's built her entire defense around a man she's personally involved with. Ask yourselves whose judgment is actually compromised here today. Ask yourselves," Emma said, calm and level, "why a consulting fee to a company he secretly owns started showing up in our books a full year before my father died." The room went very still. She turned to Nathan, and he stood without being asked twice, walking to the front with the same unhurried economy he brought to any job site. He didn't talk about feelings or fairness or family loyalty. He talked numbers return on renovated ceremony space, the premium couples paid for a working orchard over a generic banquet hall, and industry data pulled from a decade spent building for exactly this kind of venue up and down the East Coast. He dismantled Dean's maintenance argument the way he'd dismantle a joint that had been cut wrong from the very start, methodically, without malice, until there was nothing left standing behind it for anyone to hide inside. "This is a family company," the older board member said quietly, the same one who'd questioned Emma 2 weeks earlier, addressing Dean directly for the first time all meeting. "Your uncle built half of what's sitting under this roof. I'd like to know how you sat across from him at this table and let him sign anything without telling him what you'd already agreed to behind his back." Dean didn't have an answer for that one. He tried anyway, something about protecting shareholder value, but the words came out thin, and nobody at the table was still listening closely enough to catch them. The vote came 8-1. Dean was suspended pending a formal review, escorted out by the same board member who had questioned Emma's judgment 2 weeks before, the one who now wouldn't quite meet Dean's eyes on his way toward the door. Nathan found Emma alone in the emptied conference room afterward, still holding the folder Marion had brought her. And for once neither of them reached for anything to say. She just exhaled, long and complete, like she'd been holding a single breath for an entire year, and Nathan crossed the room and put a hand briefly on her shoulder, and that, for the moment, was enough for both of them. The days after the vote moved differently than the days before it, slower, less braced for the next blow. The orchard didn't know a board had almost sold off a piece of itself out from under her. The trees kept turning color at their own unhurried pace, indifferent and steady, and Emma found herself walking the rows more often than the ledgers strictly required, no clipboard in hand, no reason beyond wanting to be there. Sam noticed the shift before his father admitted it out loud. "Does Emma come to our house ever?" he asked one evening, apropos of nothing, while helping stack scrap wood into a bin behind the shop. "No," Nathan said. "Do you want her to?" Nathan looked at his son for a long moment, caught somewhere between the reflex to deflect and the plain fact that the answer was yes. "Maybe," he said, which from him counted as a full confession. Emma showed up at the shed 2 evenings later without a reason on the calendar, no wedding to discuss, no invoice to review, nothing but the drive that had brought her there on its own. She found Nathan sanding a rail he'd already finished twice over. "I don't have a business reason to be here," she said from the doorway. "I noticed," Nathan said, setting the sander down. "I wanted to say thank you. For Thursday. For all of it. Really. You already thanked me, in the parking lot. I wanted to say it again without a folder between us this time." They stood there a moment, close enough that the space between them had stopped being about work and started being about something neither of them had put a name to yet. Nathan didn't reach for her. She didn't reach for him, but neither of them stepped back either, and under the bare bulb, with the smell of cut pine still hanging in the air, that felt like its own kind of answer. Diane Pruitt called the following week with news that landed somewhere between flattering and unsettling. A trade publication wanted to run a feature on Nathan, the quiet return of the man behind the Marchetti stage, 6 years gone from the industry, and, as far as anyone in New York knew, retired for good. Along with the article came something else, an email, forwarded through Diane, from Alden and Rowe Events. They wanted him back, in some capacity. Freelance, high profile, no relocation required if he didn't want it. Just his name attached to their biggest jobs again, the way it had been before. Nathan read the email twice at his kitchen table that night, long after Sam had gone to bed, and didn't answer it right away. He carried the offer with him for the better part of a week, turning it over the way he'd turn over a piece of lumber before deciding what to make of it. It was, on paper, everything his old career had been building toward before he'd walked away from it: recognition, better money, and work that would outlive him in photographs at other people's weddings for years to come. It was also, unmistakably, a door back to a version of his life that had ended the day his wife died, and he wasn't sure yet whether walking through it meant moving forward or just moving backward with better lighting on the whole thing. Emma heard about the offer from Diane before Nathan told her himself, and when he finally did, sitting across from her on the same overturned crates where they'd first said the true things out loud, she didn't ask him to stay. "I won't pretend I don't want you here," she said. "But I'm not going to be the reason you turn down something you're proud of." "That's not why I'd take it," Nathan said. "And it's not why I wouldn't either." Sam settled it without meaning to, the way children sometimes settle the things adults spend weeks circling around. "Are you going to keep building stages here forever?" he asked over dinner one night, not looking up from his plate, the question landing with the weight only a 9-year-old could deliver without noticing it. Nathan didn't answer right away. He thought about New York, about the version of himself that had once flown out on a Thursday and come home on a Sunday, and called that a life. He thought about the notebook of sketches still sitting in a box at the house, and the 6 years he'd spent building a smaller, steadier world for his son instead. 2 days later, he called Alden and Rowe back and turned down the standing offer, agreeing instead to a handful of freelance projects he could take on his own terms, from his own shop, without ever having to leave Traverse City for good. He didn't make an announcement about any of it. He simply kept showing up at the orchard every morning, the way he had for months, and let that be the whole answer. Harvest ended the way it always did, with the last of the cherries stripped from the trees and the crew gathering for the small celebration Walter Whitcomb had started decades earlier, one Emma had never once considered skipping, whatever else was happening in her life. Marion was there, finally allowing herself to relax after weeks of feeling responsible for everything the vote had uncovered. Sam ran between the tables with 2 other kids from the crew, sticky with cider, entirely unbothered by anything that had happened in a boardroom he'd never even seen the inside of. Off at the edge of the clearing, away from the tables and the string lights, Nathan had built something small, an arbor barely large enough for 2 people, unconnected to any client's order, unlisted on any invoice Marion would ever see. Emma found it before anyone told her it was there, drawn by instinct more than direction, and she understood exactly what it was the moment she saw it standing alone in the dark. Nathan was waiting beside it, hands in his pockets, watching her cross the grass toward him. "You'd make a great bride someday," he said, the same words as before, but nothing about his voice was the same as it had been that first afternoon. Emma stopped in front of him, close enough now that neither of them needed to raise their voice over the music drifting from the tables behind them. "Then I suppose," she said, "I've found my groom." Somewhere behind them, Sam was telling Marion an elaborate story about a fish he claimed to have nearly caught that summer, and Marion was laughing in a way she hadn't let herself in weeks. The string lights swayed over the folding tables. The trees stood the way they'd stood for 60 autumns, patient and unhurried, having seen this town grow up around them one season at a time. Nathan reached out and took Emma's hand, the first time either of them had let it be that simple. Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. She hadn't been looking for a groom when this had started. She'd been looking for someone who wouldn't walk away the moment the orchard needed rebuilding, and under the arbor he'd built for no one but her, she finally stopped looking.